Hi everyone, and welcome to our first episode of Equivalent To. I'm Abby.
And I'm Sophia.
And together we're going to explore the unspoken truths about STEM.
The barriers and challenges that underrepresented groups in STEM face.
How we can make STEM culture more supportive and functional for everyone.
And what experiences and advice the Imperial community has to offer.
We've teamed up with Dr. Shini Samara. Shini is a mechanical engineer, media broadcaster, and science communicator. She's committed to making the world of STEM a more inclusive, diverse, and welcoming space for everyone.
Every episode, we will dissect the honest and vulnerable conversations that Shini has with some of Imperial's impressive scientists, teachers, students, and alumni.
In our first episode, we're going to delve into one of the most important fields that we should be talking about diversity in. That is AI.
Shini has interviewed our lecturer, Dr. Kanta Dihal. Abby and I are studying for a master's in science media production here at Imperial. So we're learning a combination of science communication and media production. So learning how to make science documentaries and radio and things like that.
And Kanta teaches our course, Science and Social Contexts. So in her conversation with Shini, she has some really great insights into why STEM looks the way it does today. So we have both the history and the stories we tell contributing to how the STEM industry looks today. I think what I found most interesting about Kanta's research is just the idea that the stories we tell shape how STEM culture and the world around us look.
And I actually find it really interesting how a lot of people's knowledge of history actually comes from fiction, like fiction books and fiction films. There was Hidden Figures recently, which is about a team of female African-American scientists and mathematicians who served like a really key role in building up NASA's space program. But we might not have known that from what we learned in school. So it's cool that there was a film about that.
Yeah, I feel like film and stories are a really good tool to rewrite history. And it reflects how we see the world and therefore how we build the world around us. And I was just thinking about Oppenheimer and what's it called? The
Atomic Bomb?
No, the one with Benedict Cumberbatch. The Impression?
The Imitation Game.
Imitation Game, yeah. The Imitation Game and Oppenheimer, and those informed me a lot about history during that time as well. Yeah. Is there anything that comes to mind that really influenced how you view the world of STEM by any chance?
Yeah, a book I read recently is called Lessons in Chemistry. It's a fiction book, but I think it probably reflects what it would have been like for a woman in the 50s to be a chemist. So this character, has this huge intellect, but she hasn't been able to gain her PhD because of sexism and the way that women are treated in chemistry. She ends up doing a lot of work for the lab, but other people take credit for it. And I thought it was a really powerful book. I really enjoyed the story. And I see it everywhere as well. So like when I'm in Waterstones having a little browse, it's at the front, or it was at least when it first came out, it was really popular. And I always see people reading it on the tube. And I mean, I'm a chemist. I have a chemistry degree. And it's nice that a book that I can really resonate with also seems to resonate with a lot of people, or a lot of people are interested in it.
Yeah, it's a little tangent, but this is really reminding me of the woman that I met on the train yesterday. So she was a chemist. She was much older. I think she was in her late 60s, and she had studied chemistry in Warwick University. She said that she was one of 6 pupils, 6 women in her whole cohort. And by the end of the degree, only 4 of them actually graduated. So a lot of people had dropped out because the STEM culture was not supportive of them, and they were, she says she felt like the men in her course kind of were front and center, and that they were kind of fighting for their space there. They didn't feel like they were really there to do the real business. They were kind of just there because they let them in, you know. They were in, oh, come on, you can come be here, but it wasn't that they were taken seriously. So I think it would have been great for her to have read something like this.
Yeah, it probably speaks to the fact that even though this is a fiction book, it gives a sense of what it might have been like in the 50s for a female chemist.
Yeah. And so Kanta also talked about how she had entered spaces and stood out just by virtue of her identity.
We also asked some of the students at Imperial College to reach out and share their experiences on going into different fields. They're surrounded by people who don't look like them. They had any particular experiences like that?
Like literally yesterday, got told that like being a director of photography is literally impossible for a woman. So I was like, well, thanks. And until now, I've never thought about how my gender could affect my career. I went to see Dune yesterday, and I watched all the executive producers, like at the end, like the filmmakers and stuff, and they were all men, and I was like, this is so sad. And I'm just wondering, I don't have any role example of like a woman who made it into the film industry and who's famous. And I think what really would help is having women come and talk to me, saying, this is what you need to do. Yes, it's like, what can you do to make it easier for you as a woman in the film industry? I'm really scared. I don't have the answer. Yeah.
So I like this clip because it sort of calls to attention that obviously this isn't just a problem in STEM. So the course that we're doing is science media production. So most of us have science backgrounds, but we're learning how to make science documentaries and science radio and things like that. So we're kind of coming from 2 different fields that are both male dominated and how to navigate that in both ways.
Yeah, I think it's this clip we particularly resonated with because it's a world that we're going into as well. So I think it's very, I don't know, I really liked hearing her say that she was scared. I think it's nice to hear that as well because we don't have the answers either.
Yeah, and we were talking to like a director producer recently, and he was saying that part of the reason that there's like less women director of photography and some of those roles is because they think like there's this long held belief that women are not the ones that want to go out in the field and like go on location and shoot there, and they want to sort of stay in like maybe a more office based role, and that's still kind of carrying forward, I think.
Yeah, so we've talked about how the stories we tell reflect how the field of science looks today. What about the stories we tell about AI? And this is kind of what Kanta's work addresses. Yeah, I think this was such an interesting topic in how AI is represented in film. And I did a bit of like a deep dive into kind of Kanta's research and also just this subject in general. And I found an interesting theme is that whenever we see AI, whenever we picture AI as this kind of diplomatic, godlike, all-knowing figure, we see them as white. We see them as like a Eurocentric, like all-knowing person. Like, for example, Jarvis from the Avengers. I don't know if you've watched the Avengers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was kind of interesting, like when I pictured Jarvis, and I could just Google image searched him as well, just so I could see if I was remembering accurately. But Jarvis is blue as well, which I guess is like traditionally the masculine colour. And a male voice as well. So if that's most people's pictures of AI, I mean, Marvel's huge. Yeah. So that will be a lot of people's pictures of AI.
Exactly. And then on the other side, going like more into cyberpunk and those kind of movies that we watch, is whenever we think of AI as serving us or like an AI as a servant, then we usually put a woman or a woman of color. I'm particularly thinking of Ghost in the Shell or Blade Runner, where I guess the character in Ghost in the Shell is kind of transcending gender and race a little bit, but I guess that's kind of this weird fantasy, but still it's like it tends to be that they're women or women of color, which is interesting. And looking further into this, I like found this concept called techno-orientalism. Basically, Orientalism is like when you have harmful stereotypes about the Orient. And so when we think of like countries like Japan advancing technologically, we kind of impose this like fearful and kind of harmful stereotypes on top of that. So that's just, if anybody wants to look more into that, I think that's just a general like good term to search, techno-orientalism, and kind of watch films through that lens as well.
Yeah, and I'd never heard of that before actually, so it's interesting to learn about. And on the topic of AI and what it looks like, we actually asked you guys on Instagram, what does AI look like to you? And there's been some really interesting answers. Ghost in the Shell was one of them, so it clearly has had an impact. Age of Ultron, which is the Avengers, so Jarvis as well. So we've picked some good examples there. Some of them are other sort of robot type figures like robots from I Am Legend. There's also Agent Smith from The Matrix. There's Mark Zuckerberg,
which was the only like non-film one. Oh wait, there's one other non-film one, which is
Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, there was a film about him, wasn't there? The Social Network.
Oh yeah,
but he's
true.
not. I wouldn't say he's a figure from film. They made a film about him because he's so famous. And then there was a Renaissance painting of a woman, which interestingly, out of 10 responses, there were only like 2 female presenting ones, or sort of, there was Ghost in the Shell, which is kind of female presenting. I know they transcend gender. And then this Renaissance painting of a woman, which I'd never thought about AI that way, but
yeah, super interesting. And Kanta also talked about co-authoring The Whiteness of AI with a white man. And that brings us to another topic, which is balancing allyship, which someone else from Imperial had something to say about. So let's cue that up.
When I was in my undergraduate degree, I was the president of Women in STEM, and a lot of the time we got so many kind of other societies and people reaching out to us specifically because they wanted like more women in a field, or basically to fill like a certain quota. And this doesn't mean that they were like completely STEM related at all, but they were just like, oh, can you come to this event? And we'd be like, yeah, of course, like we would love to. And then we go to it and it was like extremely like male dominated, but and they kind of just needed us to show that they were inclusive to women, and it just felt like I was using my members there. And there was also a time when we held an event, and it was like a really big careers event with loads and loads of sponsors and like big profile names, and because of our social media presence, men ended up actually coming to the event too, and like they ended up kind of squashing like our own members and like trying to speak and like hog the speakers themselves, which, you know, I guess it wasn't like part of a quota, but we often got messages of like, can we still be part of the society if we identify as like cis white men? And we were like, yes, because allyship exists. Then again, there's also like a time when you need to kind of check your allyship.
And it seems like Kanta's work has really shown why it's an important place to go. How there's so much benefit including allies in your work. I think once again, talking about this with allies is the way to tackle this.
And another important context in which allyship should be talked about, I think, is positive discrimination. We've both thought about this in our own careers, and it's something that Kanta and Shini talk about too.
So I think that was a really interesting clip for Sophia and I to listen to, because everything that they talked about really shaped our own narrative and how we viewed positive discrimination in our experiences of our careers. So I don't know if, Sophia, you want to start by talking about your experience with positive discrimination.
Yeah, so I've definitely felt at times that I might have been a diversity hire in my career. So I got my first job out of university as a science communication job. It's what I've wanted to do with my life. It was definitely a career move. The background to this is I did an internship right before my last year of university. I did really well in the internship. I won one of the poster prizes for my academic poster. I made a lot of good connections and I really enjoyed myself as well. And the year afterwards, as I was graduating in my last year, there was a job which I ended up getting, but I didn't even think to apply to the job because it said we needed somebody to start ASAP, but I still hadn't finished my dissertation. I still hadn't done any of my exams, so I didn't even think to apply. But then somebody at work who I'd talked to during the internship, I'd made it really clear that I was interested in science communication and science education. She emailed me and said, why didn't you apply for this job? And I did, and I ended up getting the job. And I still didn't feel really confident about it because when I applied, I didn't fit all of the essential criteria. It wasn't advertised as a graduate job, so I guess it could have been for somebody with like maybe 1 or 2 years of experience or a graduate. And it was only one thing that I didn't fit. I just didn't know how to make websites, but I fit a lot of the other criteria. And especially because it was my first job, it was the pandemic. And I think there was a lot of talk about, like, will we get jobs? So I was feeling a bit more insecure than maybe I would have done anyway. So I get this job and I had a couple of comments about, like, oh, you know, you're the only person of colour in the workplace. There were about 15 of us. There were a lot of women, and I think I was the only person of colour. And of course it crossed my mind that I was a diversity hire. I was already very young, inexperienced. I had a lot of stuff going for me for an undergraduate, but I still hadn't had real world office experience. So of course it crossed my mind.
Yeah, and I guess when people make comments when they're trying to be, encouraging about the fact that there is diversity there, those comments may not necessarily land the same way with you as what they're intending to.
Yeah, and with these other factors piling up, the fact that I was young, the fact that I was new to a workplace, so I didn't feel like I was doing really well in my job all the time. It was very fast paced. There were a lot of new skills to learn. I'd never had an office job before or worked in that kind of environment. So with all of those other factors piling up, plus the fact that I'm a woman of colour, it made me feel quite small sometimes. The thoughts that I might have been a diversity hire. And I think now, looking back, maybe it was one factor of many, but I think a lot of it is they were giving a chance to somebody who had a lot of potential. Abby, have you had any experiences of this in your career?
So yes, for me, I grew up doing a lot of theatre and acting, and I was lucky enough one day to get cast in a series, and I was super excited about it. And so I got a lot of attention from my teachers and peers. They were excited for me, and it was a very exciting time. But whenever anyone would take any interest, I remember immediately I'd tell people, oh yeah, I got cast because they needed diversity in the cast. I'd immediately speak away my achievement as it was just because they wanted some more diversity. That's the new fashionable thing. It wasn't because of my talent or anything, don't worry. And I think it's because I had this paranoia that people would assume that the only reason I was there was because of they wanted diversity. So I wanted to say it before they did. And I think that's true. I think some people do look at, I don't know. I think some people do look at people of colour and women of colour in workplaces and wonder if they were there because of their skills and worthiness or because of diversity hire. And that insecurity or that shame around potentially being a diversity hire consumed me a little bit, to the fact that I just never owned the achievement of it. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, did that shame, or did you ever resolve that, or how do you feel better about it now?
I think it's different to your experience, because I think the thing that bothers me the most is my own internalized feeling of it. Whereas I think with you, it's like when you explain to other people and worry about what they might think. So I think there's two sides of it. And especially if you're a woman of colour and you have both those feelings equally, that must be horrible. I think the way I've resolved it is talking to people who maybe aren't in my minority groups, and they still apply for jobs and don't have all of the essential criteria and get the jobs. So it's not just something that they do with people who might fit the diversity hire quota. It's something that lots of people do. And also people who are hiring, they're never going to want to hire somebody who's bad. They're going to hire people who are roughly at a certain level, and maybe somebody might be at a slightly lower level but might have more potential, and maybe the positive discrimination does come into it a bit, but it's never going to come into it as a huge factor, because it's not in the company's interest to hire somebody who's bad just because they're a woman of colour, for example.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, they need somebody who's capable and who's going to get the job done, and we have the confidence that we've gotten the job done at the end of the day. And I think it's so interesting that you bring up about people applying to jobs without fully meeting the criteria, because I have read many like social media posts about that white men are very comfortable to apply to jobs when they only meet like 60% of the criteria, whereas women of color or women in general, they feel that they have to meet all of the requirements and be above and beyond so that they feel worthy to take up the space in the workplace. Which I think is so interesting coming from you as a woman of colour, that you felt that way as well. And that's why I think it is very important to talk to people outside of your minority about these issues, because for me, how I dealt with it as well is realising that no matter what issues you face, everyone has a level of imposter syndrome, because at the end of the day, I think that this is another side of imposter syndrome, us holding on to the fact that, maybe we're only here because of positive discrimination. That's us feeling like we're an imposter, And I think if that weren't the case, we'd have something else to latch on to speak away our achievements. We'll have something else to feel like an imposter. And speaking to other people, everyone feels imposter syndrome. White men, white women, everyone, they feel like even anyone who you think this space belongs to them, they also feel imposter syndrome. And I think that helped me as well.
So I was actually on the other side, and I had to hire an intern. So I was involved in the hiring process of summer interns. And I think it's important to invite a wide range of people to interview, a very diverse range of people to interview. But then once the interviews are done, you just pick the best person. And I quite like that way of thinking. So I don't really feel guilty about being invited to interview, even if positive discrimination is a factor, because I have had to face some more societal barriers than others have. But then at the end of the day, the best person will get the job, or the person who, and it might not be the best person with skills. There's so many things to consider. It's like, do you fit well within the company culture? Are you a nice person? Are you easy to work with? That's also a skill too. So it might not be on my CV that I'm a nice person to work with, but it is something that I think people, when they're hiring, consider.
Yeah. So I guess what you're trying to say is, by the time you get to the stage of saying yes or no to do you get to join our company or not, you've had to fill so many other criteria that the company wants. You have to be a good fit for the company. You have to have all these skills that you are already worthy, even if you got the interview or you got one door was opened for you because of positive discrimination. There were still so many other doors that you had to open yourself to get to that stage, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant way of putting it.
Thanks. So Kanta's work is really at the intersection between hard science and fiction, and her and Shinny go on to talk about how choosing this path is not very straightforward.
And I love what Kanta is saying about trying to encourage more polymaths into the world. And it seems like the Dutch system is better than the UK system, at least from my perspective, because you can take more subjects for longer. Some of my friends did prefer A-levels, or like when you narrow down to 3 or 4 subjects when you're 17. But I didn't like it. What did you think?
Yeah, neither. I remember feeling so jealous. I'm not familiar with the Dutch system, but from watching movies in the American system, knowing that they get to take a broad range of subjects up to high school and also in university, just how much that keeps your options open. I was so jealous because, we're made to make these decisions at actually, I think even at 14, I was choosing my subjects for my 3rd year of high school, 14, 15. And you're so young then, and you're already kind of narrowing, you're shutting off so many areas of your development professionally, just as they said. And I feel like this should just stay open until your brain fully is developed at 25.
Yeah, so that means I'm 25. Well, I only turned 25 a week ago, and that means my brain's fully developed now.
And now you're ready to make that choice of subject choices.
Yeah, now I know what I want to do with my life. Now I'm doing science media production, which took a long time to figure out for me.
Yeah, so tell us about how you figured that out.
So yes, I had a big choice to make between art and chemistry, so very, very different subjects. Yeah, I loved both of them at school. I took, for A-levels, I wanted to do history or German. I was interested in all the subjects, so choosing my A-levels was really difficult. The only one I actually knew I wanted to do was art, especially because you can take that as a standalone subject because it doesn't relate as much to everything else. And then I ended up choosing maths, chemistry and physics as my other 3 A-levels. So when it came to choosing university, I really wanted to do either art or chemistry. And I think a lot of it came down to I didn't have the support at school to do art. My art teacher was horrible. I really didn't appreciate her teaching style, and she wanted me to do art at university, I think, but she kind of pushed me into it in a very weird way. The teaching style wasn't amazing. I didn't feel like I had much support with the school in general to go to university to do art. I went to my careers advisor with this dilemma, and I said, I really want to do either art or chemistry. I'm really interested in both of them, and I don't really know what to do. And she told me to do engineering because there's not enough women in engineering.
Oh, okay.
Which is true, but that's
not a solution.
It's not a motivation for me. It doesn't give me any self-determination or self-motivation to go and do engineering. If I'm not interested in engineering, there's no point in me doing that just to fill a quota.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that was my school's level of support with this dilemma, and it obviously didn't help. So I ended up going for the more academic option and doing chemistry.
So then how did you so now we're studying science media production. So how did you kind of resolve this, choice between chemistry and art? Is it resolved now is the question?
I think so. I'm still doing loads of art in my spare time. I went to do my chemistry degree, and I set myself a very hard rule that if I couldn't keep up with my art, I would drop out and start an art degree. And I did keep up with my art, ended up being president of the Art Society and doing loads and loads of art. And about 3 years into my course, I heard the term science communication for the first time. And I'd never heard this before. And it's the idea that you can communicate, most organizations will have some sort of science communication to tell people who might not be experts in the subject about the research that they're doing, and the science that they're doing. And so that's the career path that I went down. As soon as I heard that, I kind of knew, and I knew you could be really artsy with that as well. You could do illustrations to show your work. You could, be really creative with maybe if you're doing outreach for children, lots of different things. And then after I'd heard of science communication, I looked up master's degrees in it, and then this science media production master's came about, and I'd already been really interested in film as well, separately. I grew up really interested in animation, so I watched loads of behind the scenes in the film industry in general. And then I saw this master's degree and I thought, oh, that's perfect.
Wow, that's really, that's
quite long-winded.
No, but that's really nice to hear that you found that resolution kind of early on. It's kind of nice to show that, nowadays we do have the options, and there are new courses and new jobs out there that are more open to interdisciplinary work, which is so important.
Yeah, and the interdisciplinary, when I told people about this problem at university, their advice was always do art restoration, which is like, you know, putting the little chemicals and piecing together like really tiny bits of old paintings to make it look the same.
Yeah. But then you're not creatively fulfilled, and you're not doing science. So.
Exactly. So art restoration, I'm sure it's really, really interesting for some people, and I find it interesting if you like gave me a talk on it. But as a career path, it did not appeal to me one bit. So Abby, you had a similar Sophia's choice with between science and drama, right? And film.
Yeah, so I also, my choice was kind of between biology and drama. And well, I guess, okay, for me it wasn't really a personal choice. It was more just, I knew that I was interested in science and art, like broadly, and I just was looking for something to fulfill me. But the kind of sentiment that I grew up with was, so I looked up this quote that I kind of vaguely remembered. It's a John Adams quote. I'm just going to read it out to you. So he says, "I must study war and politics so that my children shall be free to study commerce, agriculture, and other particularities, so that their children can study poetry, painting, and other fine things." So this is kind of the quote, this sentiment of like, it's a privilege to study art. You kind of need to get to a certain level to be able to study art was what I grew up with. And that's kind of what my parents instilled in me. They always pushed me to do engineering and medicine, like Shani said, and that they thought that's like what I need to study till we can survive and have a good job. And so I kind of never thought that art was available to me until we were like in a financially stable, and because we immigrated from India. So like, I think there's that survival mindset of immigrants that limit us to choose art as well, because you're like, I shouldn't be choosing something that's not a stable career because we're in survival mode. So I think that's what directed my choice. But now that I do get to meld both film and science, I kind of feel like, oh, I've made it. Or like, oh, my family's like, you know, we're stable, we've made it. But I think now I'm realizing that actually the intersection between art and science and other interdisciplinary work is important, no matter, just to challenge systems in society. It's important work, like social work for society as well, like especially thinking of science communication and Kanta's work as well. Like it's needed in society.
And I think especially for families that are still in the mindset of you need to be very financially stable before you go and follow your dreams and do the arts, there's this misconception that there are no jobs in the arts, or there are very, very few. But even though it's a competitive industry, if you look at a film credits, then there are hundreds and hundreds of different jobs. So there are jobs out there, and I think maybe that's a misconception that should be challenged.
Yeah, that is something, looking back, I realized, like, now that I'm more in have more insights into the film industry and more arts world, I can see how many jobs there are and how it is possible to be financially stable and pursue the arts as well. It's just, I think traditionally engineering and medicine were seen as more secure and vocational, which they are, but I think it's important to note that there's an abundance of jobs out there as well in arts too.
And both are necessary as well. Yeah. Engineering and medicine are obviously very necessary, but so is the arts. Everybody gains this quality of life. Yeah. And as we were saying before, people learn a lot from film, and art is so powerful. And why shouldn't it be combined with the sciences?
Yeah. So yeah, we'd really like to thank Kanta and Shini for the amazing conversations they provided for us today, and also all of our participants. And we'd love to hear more from you at the Imperial community for our next episode. So just as a reminder, like, we've got our Instagram, our LinkedIn, and our email, which is equivalent.2@gmail.com. And that's 2 as a word, TOO.
Yeah, and the Instagram is equivalent_2, and that's again 2 as a word. And you can type in equivalent2 on LinkedIn to try and find us as well.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for tuning in, and look forward to next time.
Thank you. Thanks for a great first episode.